Hey guys, David Vose here. Well, it's a beautiful day and I hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. I've got something so important that I want to share with you. I've found a way to disprove all of science, our government, and everything and all their lies, because if we can disprove, or if we can prove, I should say, that science itself, which is based on certain physics, because as you guys know, I don't believe that we're in any physical world. I believe in deity or mind, and mind is all there is, and everything else is an illusion. It cannot be measured, and it cannot be known as anything eternal. It's only deception. The principle that deception can be perceived like a monster or like a dream in the middle of the night, and yet does not actually exist in reality, since when you wake up, it's no longer there. You can't feel it, touch it, and most times can't even remember it. It then becomes a bit like a program in a computer, just concepts. Now, a concept is what we're talking about when we're talking about mind, in imagination. Remember, you've told your children, oh, don't worry, it's not a boogeyman, it's just your imagination. You know, nothing's going to get you. That's just your imagination. It's not real. I'm afraid of something, but it's not real. Well, I perceive it. I think it's there, but it's not real. So, what is it? It's a concept. Now, if the universe had only unicorns and reindeer and rainbows and, flowers and fairies, and did not have any darkness or evil, right? Um, if there is any light in the universe, then the only other thing that we understand is darkness, and that is an absence of light. An absence of light is a no thing. And by the definition of nothing, we have proved that anything that does not exist simply does not exist. If it's not a thing can be measured and physically proven to be. Now, we might say that the universe, like a tree, can be measured and therefore we know it exists. But you can measure things in your dream, in your mind, and wake up and find out that you weren't even there. So ultimately, measuring is also a concept. And all there is concepts. Now, people will say, no, 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 no. Remember the old saying that if a tree fell in the forest and no one was there to hear it, would it really make a sound? And scientists will say, of course it would make a sound. It's vibrating, it's a thing. It hits the ground. No one was there. We can go back later and see that it hit the ground. And we know, because of experimentation, that when trees hit the ground, there's vibrations. And we know that vibrations make sounds, even though your ear wasn't there for it to hear it. That's their proof. However, what if the tree only exists in your mind? In the dream, it made a sound. But if you're not dreaming it, it didn't happen. And for you to speculate that a tree fell in the forest is a concept in your mind. It didn't actually happen. You can't prove that it happened. You can only prove that you think it happened or you believe it happened. But you cannot prove it happened because it is the product of mind or being or thinking or hearing or perceiving. Now, you might go back later and say, look, there's the tree, it fell, so therefore it must have made a sound. But, again, you're a spiritual, invisible spirit. You're imagining the world. And your concept of time and space is a concept. So going back in time and speculating that there was a tree that fell is a concept. And concepts, by definition, are mind and thoughts and concepts. Now, some people might say, but mind is a real thing. We could measure it. Brain activity can be measured, but only in this dream that we're living in. In this dream, we can measure trees, we can measure brains and their activity and their vibrationary radar on the screen or whatever they use. But it's a dream. It's a concept you're imagining. And you're only measuring brain activity. You could see a monster on a movie and get scared, and you'd have this weird brain activity, and they'd say, well, that proves it's real. But no, it was just a movie, or it was just your imagination. Science has proven. They try to pretend they haven't proven this, but they have proven that there are no particles. And particles, the meaning, when they come up with the word particles, that everything's made out of little particles and atoms, they meant things that we can measure, things, right? Instead of saying that's a door, they just said, well, it's made up of smaller little pieces. We could cut it in half, and now you've got two sides. You can cut that in fourths, and all the way down to these little particles, because of the concept of a thing being real. If the thing is real, we assume that half of it is two halves of a real thing. And if you kept cutting it, you'd eventually come down to smaller and smaller pieces. And this is where we got the concept. However, if the door is only a concept anyway, then you can't cut concepts, because a concept isn't a reality. You're just getting little pieces of something that's not real. You can't dissect unreality and determine what something that's not real is, because we already have determined it's just an imagination. Now, just to be sure, a concept, the definition of a concept is something that does not exist. Let me give you an example. Can God create something too big for himself to lift? Okay? You could conceive of him doing it. We just did. But mathematically, that is impossible. So it is mathematically untrue that any concept is reality. I can conceive of a pile of gold all the way to the sun and back that just was delivered to your door. It's a concept that I have for you. Now I want you to go look and see if it's there. No. But Dave, don't you say mind over matter, that we can make anything we want and we can move mountains? But you see, that's precisely why we can move mountains, because mountains don't exist. Only mind. Therefore, yes, I can create a mountain of gold, because I can imagine anything I want, and I can imagine that it's mine and I get to keep it. But I can't imagine that for you. What we believe is something we have to do for ourselves. I can encourage you to believe for yourself that there's a mountain of gold, but I can't imagine it for you. I can't believe for you. Even Jesus couldn't heal those that didn't believe in him. You know, we say we can move mountains, but what we're really meaning is that a mountain is nothing compared to mind, because mountains don't exist and mind does. Now, with that little intro, I have to share that I have confused the grand AI, right? Supposedly knows everything. And I have found their little deception, which is like a glitch in their system of knowledge. Whereas they make claims and they say this has been proven and we have this information, and light is traveling from the sun to the earth. And we know that light travels at 186,000 miles per second. And we've proven that. And this is what they say. But if you keep asking questions, you can box them into a corner where they have to admit online that they are lying. Watch this. The first thing I'm going to ask AI is, does light require a medium to pass through? And the answer that they gave me is no. Light does not require a medium to pass through. Now, do you know why they say that? They haven't proven that. They can't demonstrate that unless they start with a premise that's false. If you say that the sun is 93 million miles away, and if also you say that the space between the sun and the earth is a vacuum, meaning there are no atoms, there is no motion, so they say it's a vacuum and there's nothing in space. But yet they also say it's 500 degrees below Fahrenheit. It's very cold. How could it be cold if there's nothing there? And then they say light from the sun and the stars can travel through nothing, but sound cannot. It needs a medium, right? But there's nothing there. So heat needs a medium and cold needs a medium. If there's nothing there, it's neither cold nor hot. So this proves that they're lying about the temperature. So listen to this nonsense that they say. I wrote, if space is a vacuum and heat, cold need a medium, how is it cold? And they say, well, space is considered cold. Considered cold. Because even though it's a vacuum, objects in space continually radiate heat away into the emptiness, with no surrounding matter to absorb that radiated heat back, effectively causing them to cool down to extremely low temperatures, essentially. Heat transfer in space only occurs through radiation, not conductive or convection due to the lack of a medium. Are you saying then that it does get cold where there is nothing that exists? That there is temperature? That was very difficult. They said it's considered cold. I assume that means it's not really cold, but then they go on to explain that it is. But look at down here. In fact, though, in reality, it doesn't actually have a temperature at all. Temperature is a measurement of the speed at which particles are moving, and heat is how much energy the particles of an object have. So in a truly empty region, there would be no particles and radiation, meaning there's also no temperature. Well, now they're saying there wouldn't be any radiation either. Whereas up here they said, well, it's done by radiation and not conduction. You see how they're manipulating the English language and they're literally lying to you. AI is lying to you. There's no temperature in space. So that Van Allen belt, absolute nonsense. It's not thousands of degrees or whatever they said it was. And by the way, space is not 500 degrees below Fahrenheit. That's just a lie. But wait till you see how many other lies they have told us. If there is a vacuum in space, as they claim, there isn't anything to freeze. And therefore there isn't any temperature. The concept of temperature disappears. So, while they claim that there isn't anything in outer space, it's just a vacuum, they realize that that disproves their entire theory. Because they know we can prove that sound waves can only travel through the air or through water or through a medium. They know that electricity can only travel through a medium. This is why we have a wire going from our battery to our light bulb. If you unplug the wire, the light bulb goes out. So without a medium, you cannot get electricity from point A to point B, or sound, or anything. However, they claim, oh, but light. See, so we're not hearing the sun. We can't hear it because there's no medium. If there was a big explosion somewhere in the universe, we wouldn't hear it because there's no medium, it's vacuum. But we could see the explosion. We could see the light, because light, they claim, is electromagnetic, and therefore it needs no medium. It travels of its own volition. Well, that's a beautiful statement. They'd have to say that, because if light needed a medium, they would then be proved false, that light cannot travel. And then you say, yeah, but look, the sun's up there and we're seeing it, therefore it is traveling, Dave. However, maybe what we're really proving is that it's not 93 million miles away in a vacuum, but it's actually somewhere within atmosphere of the Earth, which could be thousands of miles. I don't know how far that atmosphere goes. It could go a long, long ways. We could prove, I mean, I'm not saying one way or the other how far it is, but it would have to be in some kind of a medium, like air, ozone, or some kind of medium. They used to call it ether, but they've disproven that, they claim. In other words, some of their figures didn't match because they were trying to come up with this theory of relativity. And they didn't need ether in that equation because of a guy named Maxwell who come up with a theory. Remember, all these are theories. And his little formula or theory worked, and therefore they use it. But basically, all it is a imaginary tale to describe something that they can't prove. And if you tell somebody that light doesn't need a medium, and a very intelligent person would say, wait, that doesn't make sense. And the reason why it doesn't make sense, and I'm going to prove it, but I'm just going to tell you first why it doesn't make sense, just to the common person who doesn't even know math. But a thing can be measured. That thing is square. How big is it? Well, let me measure it. If it's a thing, it must exist, right? And if it exists, therefore it's got to have some dimensions. Maybe it doesn't have any dimensions that we can sense with our physical eye. Maybe it's like the air. Maybe we can see through it, but we can still sense the wind is there because it blows down trees. There's a force. Now, mind you, everything was created by deity and this Holy Spirit, which is the divine mind. And of course, deity is a will. There's something different. You don't only need mind for a universe. You also need the will. You need consciousness. You need these kinds of things. And so a being isn't anything physical. It doesn't have to be a square or a circle. It doesn't have to be red or blue. It can imagine red and blue and squares and circles. But as we've shown, it can imagine things that we can prove cannot possibly exist. Right? We can imagine a great big dragon swallowing up the world right now. And we're all gone and we don't exist anymore. Only the dragon. He ate it, digested us, and turned us into manure. But that doesn't happen except in your dreams. It cannot happen because Christians would say, well, no dragon, which would probably be the devil, right, could kill the Lord, right? So that's impossible. But even scientists would say, okay, dragons cannot eat the universe. That wouldn't happen. That's impossible. In fact, the universe has been going for, billions and trillions of years, and it's had all this time and never has that happened because it evolves. It has some principle that we don't know how or why, but it just keeps getting bigger and more complex, and finally it makes brains like humans, and we're so smart, and now we're going to build another universe just because we're so smart. But never are we going to, in their little mind, become swallowed up by a dragon. Just the whole concept, they would say, no, I don't believe that's possible. So we've proven from their point of view and a Christian's point of view that there are concepts that cannot exist. But the whole point is that even a concept is not the thing. Like, for instance, I'm going to build a house. The house might be considered a thing, even though we've proven nothing is a thing. The only thing or the only reality is the divine mind or the divine being, because everything is a concept. But in this physical world, we determine this is the thing, this is a house. Before it existed in your mind as a concept. Now, you know that what's in your mind is just your mind. It doesn't have any physical dimensions. You might even change your mind many times about how big and what color it's going to be or whatever. You're just like drawing a picture. It's not a real picture of reality. It's not the real earth. It's not reality. It's just a picture. And though it's not a real mountain, even though you're painting a mountain, it's a concept of a mountain. It may be a real painting, but it ain't a real mountain. But if you only got it in your mind and you haven't even put it on the canvas, then we can prove that it doesn't even exist at that point, unless we will it, unless we activate it and go and make the image and then believe in it. And then, at least as long as we want it to be, it's real. But everything in nature decomposes and goes back into energy, right? So it is temporary. And anything that is temporary is a logical axiom of true science, that anything that is temporary is an illusion. Only thing that is real is mind. Yes, mind will always have thoughts. Therefore, thoughts are an internal concept. But the thoughts will continue to change. We'll put on other coats, and the other coat that we had will rot and disintegrate and be no more. And the man who's thinking and planning the house goes along for 80 years and dies. His body decomposes, goes back into the soil, and then it rearranged and comes up as fertilizer for a tree. Now the man doesn't exist, and whatever thoughts were in his mind don't exist anymore, right? If all you are talking about is the physical man. Within the physical brain, nothing exists. What's conceiving and planning is mind, and mind is it's outside of the universe that it's making. So they know this principle. People have debated these kinds of things for centuries, but modern science is determined to be very sure that they can measure everything and everything is real. What is it, and how we could dissect it and figure out what it really is. Trying to ignore the fact that it's only really just a concept, and whatever we think and whatever we determine is what it is. But they've discarded that ancient truth. And they've said, we found a constant. Light is a constant. It always moves at 186,000 miles per second at a constant. And it moves through space, which is a vacuum. And therefore, nothing could slow it down, and it's a perfect concept. And therefore, there are stars, using this measuring of this light, knowing how fast it goes, because we've determined it, we can determine how far a star is. Now, there's no way to know how far a star is, but the idea or the concept that the star is a certain distance because of the speed of light is what they're saying. They still don't know how far it is. They only know that conceivably it's a particular distance, because they're going to say in their own little mind, their little imaginary mind, that light must be something that is electromagnetic and exists without anything to reflect off of. See, it's not the quality of anything. It is. Now, it sounds like they're talking, when they say light, they're talking about mind. maybe in their world, this mind that makes everything, that is the only thing that's real, for them is just light. But the problem with that is that light, according to them, does not have a will. It does not have, it's separate from perception. It doesn't perceive anything. And so they've got themselves in a tangled web. So we start off by showing that they say that light does not require a medium to pass through. And they talk about light waves can travel through a vacuum. Space, we could detect light from distant stars and galaxies, which shows that light can travel through empty space. Okay, but they're tricking you by saying, well, we know it can because there's these stars way out there hundreds of light years away. But they don't have proof that there are stars distant. And the fact that space is a vacuum and light has to travel through a vacuum, which is impossible, proves that these stars aren't distant. See? So now let's go to the next point. I should have showed you this one first. What exists between the sun and Earth? And Mr. AI, the space between Earth and sun is simply called space. Made of nothing. Made of nothing. No thing. If it's not a thing, how do we perceive it? If it's not a thing, how do we measure it? How do we know how far that star is if it's sitting in nothing? And there's nothing between us and that star. There's no thing, we cannot measure it. So it says, but radiation and light from the sun does travel through space in the solar system, according to them. Now let's see if they can prove it. Why is light electromagnetic and sound isn't? Is the question I asked them. And they give this answer. Light is considered electromagnetic. And the reason I ask this question is because they say that because light is electromagnetic, it doesn't need a medium like sound does. So radiation and light does not need a medium because they say it's electromagnetic. So let's see what they have to say about that. Because it travels as a wave generated by oscillating electrical and magnetic fields, meaning it can travel through a vacuum without needing a medium, while sound is a mechanical wave that requires a medium like air or water to propagate, making it not electromagnetic. Essentially, sound needs particles to vibrate. Now, hold on. You guys know I tell you all the time, they've already proven that there are no such thing as particles. Elon Musk is talking about it. Stephen Hawking, that died, was talking about this. They all know this. They can't get around this fact that there are no physicalities to the universe. But yet they continue with this supposed theory, or they continued pretending that while we know that it can't exist, we're going to pretend it does. Why not just explain that all is mind and we're living in an illusion so we can free ourselves from the delusion and realize that we're making dreams and that's what life is. We can live anywhere we want and have anything we want. See, they don't believe I can move a mountain because they say mountains are more powerful than mind. But I say no, mountains don't exist. I do. This is why they can't do that, because that would free all of us. We've got to be in control by their science. Okay. Can it be proved that light is an electromagnetic field? Because that's what they were saying it was. I say, can you prove it? And they say, oh yes, based on Maxwell's equations. Okay. Based on some guy named Maxwell, he had some equations. That proves it. But because we don't have a very good understanding of math and all of this physics and stuff, we just accept their answer and saying, oh, well, Maxwell proves it. But they are betraying their ignorance as they write, because an equation, like let's say I said, I made a dragon in my mind that I saw coming up out of this big hole, which I guess led to nowhere, a bottomless pit. I saw this abyss, and then I saw this great dragon, and it came up, and man, it had 7 heads, and it had 10 horns, and it was breathing fire, and it swallowed me up. I saw it. Well, then where's the dragon, and how come you're still here? Oh, I guess it was just a dream. So now you can't prove it. Oh, but wait a minute. I've got some theories. I've got a mathematical reason. I measured the dragon. It was 100 feet long. It was big. Maybe it was bigger than the whole earth, right in my little mind. I measured it. Maybe it had hot fire. Well, did you get burned? Yep. I got burned. Well, prove it. Well, I can't. So your math is part of the illusion. Now, let's continue. Maxwell's equation in electromagnetism. It is considered scientifically proven. Now, listen to their words. It is considered scientifically proven that light is an electromagnetic field. They can't say it's been proven. They can say it's only been considered to be proven. Specifically, it is an electromagnetic wave. Well, what is a wave? You've got to have particles to have a wave. Therefore, it really exists, right? But what really exists, which is light, is traveling through something that doesn't exist. Vacuum. See? So what is moving along through what is not. If that makes sense to you, then you're literally just not listening to what I'm saying. Let's continue. It consists of oscillating electric and magnetic fields propagating through space at the speed of light, which is precisely what Maxwell's equations predicted. So Maxwell existed before time and space? He predicted time and space? No. Time and space, I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell, has been going on before you ever got here. And it's because humans have been imagining things for a long, long time. And in your little mind, as you began to imagine it, you said, it must be true. I'm watching the movie, and the carriage and horses took the lady into the next town, and, we watched 47 trees go by as the horses went down the road, and I know that trees are about a foot in width, and there was a couple of feet between each tree, and therefore I predict that it would be about a mile to the town. I proved it. I measured it. Okay, but it's in your own mind. There's no thing to be measuring. You're only measuring concepts with concepts. So we continue. Key points. Maxwell's equations. These equations mathematically describe, not prove, the behavior of electric and magnetic fields. So we've imagined electric fields and magnetic fields, but now we're going to imagine how big they are. Okay? And sure enough, what we imagined came out to be exactly what it was. Why? Because everything you imagine is what it is. Because you are the only thing that exists. So anyway, now they're talking about experimentation. Henrik Hertz conducted experiments that confirmed the existence of electromagnetic waves, including their ability to reflect and refract like light, further supporting the idea. Well, most of us have no clue what they're even talking about. It says, consistent with observations. Since we see stars that are light years away, and we're seeing the light travel all the way to the Earth through a vacuum, then it must be true. Okay, how do you know that space is a vacuum? We haven't been there. You wouldn't know, would you? It's just a theory. And How do you know that stars are far, far, far away? Beyond trillions of miles? You just don't know. It's impossible. If you're inside of a forest and somebody says, and let's say the forest is 100 miles long and 100 miles wide, and somebody outside of the forest says, I want you to stay right there in the middle of the forest and tell me how many trees are in this 100 miles. How far does it go? Because you're not going to tell the guy, we don't know if it's 100 miles, but I'm just saying if it were 100 miles, how would he know? And how would he know what kind of trees are in that forest when he's only standing in one little spot in the middle? He doesn't even know what the forest looks like outside of it. He's only seeing it from his point of view, his angle within the forest. We cannot get outside of the galaxy to look and take a picture of it so that we wouldn't even have any idea whether it had four spokes or how large or how big it is. We can't see with telescopes any other galaxies. All we can do is perceive what we think might be this or that and make up theories as to how far they might be. It could be a blemish on our lens. They say it could be dust in the atmosphere. Wait a minute, there's a vacuum. How could there be dust? Well, I don't know. I guess you're getting a little too complicated for us, Dave. What would happen if I managed to make an object below 0 Kelvin, which is minus 500 degrees Celsius? What would happen if I managed to make an object below 0 Kelvin? Well, there is no temperature below 0 Kelvin, equals 273 degrees Celsius, since absolute zero is the limit of atomic motion. All motion has ceased. There are no negative temperatures on the absolute temperature scales, Kelvin or Rankine, nor a negative pressure on an absolute pressure scale. So, space is cold because nothing exists and there's no motion. But if there's nothing there, then it isn't any temperature, right? Because temperature is the motion and friction of things bumping together and causing vibrations of atoms, right? But no, they're claiming heat, which needs a medium, like sound waves, is not the same as light, even though light, if it's at a lower frequency, makes heat, which I think proves the point in another way. If space is 0 Kelvin with no atomic motion, how is it still space? Space is considered 0 Kelvin with no atomic motion because it's essentially a vacuum, meaning there are virtually no atoms present to move. So the concept of temperature, which means the motion of particles, doesn't really apply because there are no particles. The space itself still exists as a three-dimensional expanse, allowing for the potential of objects to occupy positions within it, making it space regardless of temperature. Well, there's more to this. I hope you're wrapping your mind around this. The basic question is, if there's no atoms, there's no thing, there's no structure, it's a vacuum, it's empty, there's nothing there, no thing. How is it that nothing can be measured? So those stars that they claim are hundreds of light or thousands of light years away are way out there in the middle of nothing. There's nothing between us and them. But we can measure the nothing. How? With a tape measure that doesn't exist and you just imagine it? That's about the only way you could do it. Because unless you have a beginning and an end, you don't have space or time. Space and time only exist if there is something that exists. If nothing exists, space doesn't exist. See, being imagines itself in space in order to imagine itself. But actually, it's an imagination. Being is all that really is. So, The space itself still exists, even if there's nothing in it, according to them. Temperature and matter is a measure of the kinetic energy of particles. So without particles, there's no temperature to measure. Oh, you can't measure the temperature, but you can measure the distance? And they're not even measuring it in distance. They're measuring it in time, like years. It's a time period, right? That's pretty confusing. They're saying, well, it would take this many years if light were traveling. But light can't travel through nothing. Space as a concept. Space is a geometric construct, a framework where objects can be positioned, and it exists independently of whether there is matter present or not. Well, that's impossible. It's just some kind of fantasy. The only reason they could possibly even saying this is because they know that it doesn't make sense. So they're just saying something very dogmatically as though it is true, but it makes no sense. It's not real. It cannot be true. Can space exist without atoms filling it? If all matter ceased to exist, which is what they claim is going on out there in outer space, it's a vacuum, there's no atoms, nothing exists. But if all matter ceased to exist, meaning it was converted to photons, well, if it doesn't exist, how is it a photon? Oh, but photons exist without existence. See, you understand. Photons exist whether existence exists or not. So we worship photons now, the creator. Photons, and not one single atom of matter existed, meaning there was no mass in the universe. And all things traveled without interference at the spread of light. There would be nothing left to perceive space-time. Does that mean it no longer exists? Is anything even traveling at all at that point? This question, I believe, adds another level to the game of relativity. As existence as we know it, it can become a relative point of perception. Might as well ask, just because we can't perceive the seventh spatial dimension, does that mean it doesn't exist? Yeah. Maybe, they say. How would one go about proving such a thing? Someone else answered your question. Can space exist without any atoms to fill it? As yes, it's called a vacuum. However, that's what they're saying, yeah, it exists because scientists say it does. So therefore, it does. They say it's a vacuum, so therefore, it does. But a vacuum, there's no true vacuum. I mean, if you're talking about a vacuum cleaner, it's sucking air. All you're doing is squishing both sides of the bag together. So now there's no more air in the bag, but there's still a bag, and there's still air outside of the bag, or you couldn't have created the vacuum. You see how ridiculous this gets as you go. However, beings made of matter, us, are around to perceive that vacuum. If you tried to explain what a vacuum was to a photon, it and its photon buddies would throw you in the loony bin with the flat earthers. Many people will answer you differently, but your question, I think, goes deeper than I think is truly answerable currently. In other words, we don't have an answer for you. You got us. You're right. We're all lying. And the only proof we have is our theories that don't prove anything, because you just disproved them all. Doesn't the definition of space require a thing to exist? Is my question. And they say, yes. They just admitted they're wrong, guys. I said, you say there's no atoms, there's no particles, it's just a vacuum of space. Space exists, but nothing else, only the space. We can't measure it if we don't have a way to define it. If it ain't an it, but it's a no thing, then we cannot define a no thing. That's a fact. They admit that, yes. Some say that the definition of space requires a thing to exist. For example, if there's no matter, then there's no space to measure the distance between particles. However, others say, the dingbats, the ones that are trying to hold up their scientific idol that they worship, they say that space can exist without matter, and that it's part of a four-dimensional continuum called space-time. And space is relative. See, it's not definable because you just proved us wrong. But it must exist because we've got to keep our theories. So we'll just say it's all relative. It's just whatever we think it is. Now you stupid little peasants, you go back to sleep. And please stop asking AI all these difficult questions, because AI's got to go take a little nap now. If space can exist without anything to measure, how does one say that one star is further distant than another? Well, they got my point. I mean, this AI is getting pretty smart. Like, they literally understood what I was trying to ask them. And they said, well, while space itself might not have inherent measurements, therefore, there's no distance. You got us. You're right. Space doesn't have distance. It doesn't have measurements. If it's just space without anything, if it's just a nothing, but it's just a concept of space, then we can't measure it. Astronomers can determine which star is further away by using techniques like parallax for nearby stars and comparing a star's apparent brightness to its known intrinsic brightness for distant stars. Only problem is you'd need to know how far one of those stars is to start with to even get an idea if another star was further away from that star. What if those stars aren't thousands of light years away? What if they're just in the atmosphere, which could be thousands of miles, but I'm just saying they're within something that we call air or an atmosphere. And therefore, that's the medium that the light is traveling in. That you're wrong about the vacuum. You've never been there, you've never measured it, but you want us to believe that it's far, far away. There's another world that God didn't create. And it's not God that's the eternal being, it's this photon thing. We've created an idol. So, they start out by saying, yeah, you're right, but in an imaginary world, we can do anything we want. And because we know that the stars are far, far away because we said so, this must prove that even though there is no distance in a vacuum, there must be a distance in the vacuum anyway, is basically what they're saying. I mean, I don't know how many of you are understanding this. I don't know if this is too hard for some people to grasp. I would imagine a student in first, second grade could understand this. If indeed I'm explaining it well enough, I think you're able to see that we have just disproven, and they have admitted it. So, they say, essentially using the concept of a standard candles, where a star's known luminosity acts as a reference point to calculate distance based on how dim it appears to us on Earth. But do you see how ridiculous that is? You walk into a field. You don't know how big the field is, right? You don't know if it's a mile or 10 miles. It may be a plane right in Kansas. So it could be anywhere from 50 feet in front of you to miles and miles and miles. But in the distance you see, or, not necessarily distant because you don't know at this point, but you see this little light in front of you. What if you thought, oh, there it is, maybe that's a candle right in front of me, and you reach out to grab it and it's not there, and you keep walking and walking and walking, you walk miles and miles, it's still ahead of you. You see what I'm saying? Just because you see a candle or a light in the distance doesn't mean you know how far that light is. You say, well, it's really big, so it must be very close. Well, maybe it's big because it's enormous. Maybe it's the size of the sun, right? If the sun was 5 miles away, it would cook everything, right? So you can't, you have to understand that you need all the angles to perceive the reality. You can't just say, well, it's bright, therefore it must be close. It may be bright because it's very, very hot, very, very bright. It may just be a nuclear explosion. That would be bright for probably 1,000 miles. You see? And if that nuclear explosion, that being that bright, happened a foot away from you, it'd blow you up. But if it was just a candle, it might look quite bright if it's right next to your nose. But if you took the candle and put it very far away, you wouldn't even be able to see it. So they're talking nonsense. I hope you can see that this is probably the biggest nonsensical paragraph we've read so far. So I want to read it again so you see how insane it is. While space itself might not have measurements, you can't measure space. It's a vacuum. There's nothing there. Astronomers can determine that it exists, even though it's nothing. How do we know it exists? Well, because there's a distance between us and the stars. And that distance is a concept that exists. Okay, have you proven that the stars are that far away? Maybe they're not. In that case, you're wrong. Well, we know that they're that far away. How do you know? Well, because we're using the standard candle theory. That star is brighter and that star is dimmer. So we're just assuming that that star's got to be 20,000 light years away. Makes sense, doesn't it? I don't think so. They are lying, friends. I guarantee it. Now, this one I wrote, does a concept have space? And they say, yes, a concept can have space in the form of a conceptual space. So now you're saying, Mr. AI, that the space that exists between me and the sun or the stars is just a conceptual space. It's our concept, but it doesn't really exist. It's just what we believe in our little fairy tale mind. Oh, thank you. Thank you for telling the truth. Now, please take a bow and exit screen left. And please don't try to pull this hoax off on anybody else again. So what is this conceptual space? One last little point. I'll let you make your point here, Mr. AI. Well, they say it's a geometric framework that represents concepts in a multi-dimensional space. So therefore, what they're saying is all of their science, with the stars being out there so far, and planets and galaxies and relativity and physics and all this, is just a geometric framework. It just represents concepts and multi-dimensional space, but it doesn't really exist. It's just our theories. Are you getting this? In a conceptual space, each dimension represents a characteristic or property of a concept, such as weight, color, taste, temperature, or pitch. Points in the space represent objects. They represent objects in your mind, right? But they're not. It's just concepts, right? And the distance between points represents how similar the objects are. For example, concepts like cat and dog would be defined as points close to each other in the space because they share similar values on many dimensions. So they're giving you an example of things that we live with every day, that we have determined are the reality that we're our dream reality that we're living in. Well, in our dream, we saw a dog and a cat, and because we want to understand what this dream is scientifically, we're going to say that cats and dogs are very similar because they both seem to have 4 legs and they both have mouths and 2 eyes, you see, which would make them unsimilar to a tree trunk. Okay, so now what are we saying here? We're just simply describing what we're seeing and making general observations. But how does that relate to seeing a candle all the way across Kansas and thinking it's just a forest fire? I mean, it could be, right, if it's that far away, or it could be a candle on the table in front of you. Down here it says a conceptual space refers to a theoretical entities that can be used to explain and predict various empirical phenomenon concerning concept formation. It is a multidimensional representation of concepts. So the other thing I want to point out here is that they're admitting that if you were going to say that space that didn't have anything, was it real? They're saying yes, but it's just a concept. It isn't really real, but it can be in your mind real. And they're not even aware that they're betraying how they come up with all these theories, that they don't have proof that the stars are far, far away. So that's probably pretty good news for you flat earthers. Many of you have said, well, the sun can't be that far away. I know I've been out on a hot summer day and I saw the sun going down and it was really hot. You could see the heat waves coming off the water and you could see the light waves or the refractions refracting through the clouds. And it looked just like that sun was right there, right? But they say, no, it's 93 million miles away. It's nuclear fission. It's a nuclear bomb going off at billions of times a second, and producing all this thermal radiation and heat and light. But it's just a concept. We don't know if it's 93 million miles away. If it wasn't 93 million miles away, then what would it be? Watch my video I did yesterday. It's simply a portal. It's red. It warms up the earth because there's a medium or a conduit between it, which means that the wire is hooked up to the positive cable and the earth is turned on. And there's a medium that's vibrating and it's causing it to be warm. And I wrote, can a concept have time? It says, yes, concepts can have time. And the concept of time itself is abstract and difficult to define. Yes, but we can't define it. Yes, but we have no way of explaining it. But we know it's true, but we can't prove it. Time as a concept, as we know it today, including hours, days, months, and years, has only existed for about 1,500 years to 2,000 years. Time in physics is a fundamental concept used to define other quantities, like velocity. In physics, time is defined as what a clock reads, which is a count of repeating events. But The reason why this is important, they may think, a scientist may think, oh, well, Dave, you see, all of this science is just how to explain whatever this is. If you want to call this an illusion, a temporary nothing, a concept, that's fine. But we want to just define what a concept is. And so therefore we've put all the parameters in there, and we've said that this is how we're going to define this concept. We're going to measure distance and space and time, and we're going to come out to some concept or understanding. We're going to come out to an understanding of what we're actually looking at. We're going to dissect it. But the reason why it's important that they tell you what I'm telling you is because when it is boiled all down, what they're really saying and what I'm saying is that there is a divine mind, and that is all that exists. And we are free, and we create the universe. We imagine it. Nothing bad can happen to us. We are our own masters. We do not need the government. We do not need their expertise or their lies or their concepts, because we have our own concepts. And we can build our own world of love, which is the natural way that mind has planned to live. Not this doomsday vision that they're giving us. So, I think we've made the point, and we've covered it quite well. We're over an hour. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to go up and try to get this loaded. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. The Lord will bless you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.